Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
For the people in the back, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Look, ain't y'all happy y'all brought the sun out? Because it definitely seemed like it wasn't coming out today. So you all know me. I am most recently a teacher at Hamilton High School for the last 20 years. Teaching African American history, U.S. history, psychology, government, and any other classroom they put me in. I'm transitioning to Butler Tech, but that's only a small thing. It's a big thing, but I'm still always first and foremost about my community, because when it gets down to it, I'm just a kid from Lane Street that like books.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, as we celebrate Juneteenth, we also have to recognize that things move in balance. And also at this time, I thought it was really important to bring some awareness about something that is the very opposite of what we're doing out here today. Right now, as we speak, there are folks talking about us not talking. There are folks really pushing to pass laws to keep teachers like me from being able to have necessary and needed conversations with all the people who are here, with the students who have had the pleasure, and I've had the pleasure of having in my classrooms. And where the way you're hearing this is they're talking about something called critical race theory. But the fact is, that's not what they're actually talking about. So I wanted to really kind of keep you abreast of what's going on in our Ohio government and our national government right now. So recently, critical race theory has been in the news and discussed politically. Many conservative Republicans are demonizing it and even attempting to ban it, including here in Ohio, without really even knowing what it's about. So the first thing is to talk about what is critical race theory. And you'll hear me say that and CRT interchangeably. Basically, CRT is a way to gain understanding and explain aspects of outcomes in the law, history, public policy, and various demographic data. Let me say that again. It is a way to gain understanding. Since when do you try to ban understanding in a public school or university? That is literally the opposite of what we're there to do. We're there to gain understanding. So exactly what is the rationale you have for trying to ban understanding? There are some definitions and tenets of critical race theory that any of you can look up. You got phones, you can quickly Google it. And if you want, you can Google that and we can give you a little assignment. We can have a discussion about it afterwards. It does not spend time blaming individuals. Let me give you some examples of the types of things that critical race theory is used to gain an understanding about. At its root, CRT recognizes that much of what we see happen in our society revolves around the constructs of race, and to be clear, serves the interests of people who are in power. And many and most of those people in power are white, and these things come together. No one here needs a theory to figure that out. But here are some examples. One of them goes back to a 20-year-old Chris Rock joke. You could go to any city in America and just have a street map. How do you go about finding the black folks? Easy. You find wherever Martin Luther King Drive, Boulevard, Avenue, Lane, Way, Thoroughfare, whatever it is, you find where that is, then you'll start finding the black folks. But there's a more important question. Why is it in every city you go to, there's a black neighborhood? How did that happen? It didn't happen by accident. Those are the kinds of understandings we seek in critical race theory. Another example is the regular overrepresentation of black and brown people in jail and in school discipline. And what I mean by overrepresentation is that if black people are 13.5% of the population, but 33% of the prison population, that's an overrepresentation.
Okay.
If Latino, Latinx, Hispanic people are 17% of the population, but they represent 31% of the prison population, that's an overrepresentation. But if white people represent 61% of the population, or actually that's the shrinking part, so maybe about 58 now, but are only in about 28% of the population of jail, that's an underrepresentation. How does that happen? That's the kind of understanding that we're looking for. And something that is close to home for me, changes in the drug laws. In the 1990s, we know it was a difference between the sentencing for powdered cocaine and the sentencing for rocked up crack cocaine. The question is about who had what, where, and what was they doing with it. That difference has to be analyzed and understood. And then more recently, we know that the face of the opioid epidemic is largely white, and whereas the same people who, when I was in high school, would be getting locked up, now they have therapy, and that's good for them. But why wasn't that always the case? These are the kinds of understandings we need to seek out, and that critical race theory tries to help us find the language for and the tools for. You see, so these are just a few examples of the kind of realities that CRT attempts to explain. Clearly, America needs to figure out these type of issues. So if sensible people recognize that you can't get good solutions until you get improved understanding of the issues, what is all the fuss really about? CRT has actually been around for decades. You are just now hearing about it because many conservatives are trying to avoid important conversations that they don't want to have. Those conversations point to government's responsibility to all its citizens and requires changes in the structures that give them power. Since most people have not even heard of critical race theory before until recently, it's easy to lie about what it actually is and then use it as a boogeyman to scare uninformed citizens, especially uninformed white citizens who hear race in there somewhere and get nervous. Here's an example. Recently, y'all know me, and I talk to everybody, and on my good days, most people talk back. Recently, I ran into something that happens to high school history teachers more and more lately. I was talking with someone who identifies himself as a conservative white male, and right after saying that makes him enemy number one nowadays, ha ha ha, but he wasn't joking, he asked me a curious question. He asked me if I teach divisive history. I responded that I teach facts. This is really important because that word, divisive, is also at the heart of House Bill number 327, which has been introduced and is currently standing not quite in committee as introduced as of this morning. I stopped and looked it up. Okay. And it attempts to ban teaching critical race theory and any other so-called liberal topics in Ohio schools. What makes something a divisive concept, according to this bill, here's a few examples. Teaching that one race is inherently superior to another. I've been teaching 20 years, no one teaches that. Teaching that a person is automatically racist because they belong to a particular race, which, if you read into the text, means white people. Well, critical race theory doesn't do that. Teaching implicit bias is a real thing. Well, it is a real thing. Ask anybody in this crowd who's been stopped by the police in the last ever. Teaching that people in the present still have a responsibility to correct historical wrongs. That's in the bill. This is actually about reparations and so-called white guilt. Or teaching that America is fundamentally racist or sexist. That comes specifically from the language of the bill. You don't need a theory to figure that out, just a pocket constitution and a declaration of independence. Because all you gotta do is look at who was included when those was written and who wasn't. Because who was it? Everyone who were black slaves. All poor white men, women, Native Americans, and we could trace the progression of them gaining rights to understand why this must be discussed. Still, what makes these things divisive? Divisive means that some relationship exists where people are trying to add problems to or even split up a relationship. Well, then let's consider this in terms of a relationship. Let's suppose you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, partner, significant other, someone you call bae or boo. And there is some set of behaviors or activities that your partner is doing and y'all discussed and agreed would stop or at least improve. Does that mean when your significant other starts talking about the stuff y'all agreed would get better but has not, is that person starting a divisive conversation? Oh, y'all don't hear me. Or are they just talking about the stuff that you don't feel like talking about? And there's a difference. You know the answer to that question. And why doesn't your partner want to talk about those issues? Obviously, so they can keep doing what they've been doing. Now, I ain't trying to have nobody have to fight today now. But you know what I'm talking about. All right. So CRT and other so-called divisive concepts are simply ways to articulate these long-standing problems in the relationship. They try to make sense of the world and offer correction to the problems in our relationships. However, that understanding demands responsibility on the other side of this relationship surrounding race in America. However, some folks don't want to hear that or take that responsibility. That is why they call it divisive. Because we have to consider the alternative to not trying to understand this shared reality. What that means instead is that nothing is wrong in the relationship. And everything that has happened is happening simply how it is. That what we see is the way it's supposed to be. It is the way that God intended it to be, and everybody should just accept it. And if you study history and come through my class, you know that ain't the first time that logic is being used.
Amen. Amen.
That logic was used on the plantation too. God meant you to be here. Now bow down. So, what is the consequence of attempting to ban these concepts and not having these critical conversations? Well, there are two possibilities, one immediate and one long term. On the short term, there's the cynical possibility that this is all about the next election cycle. Just like the person who asked me about what I teach, this is intended to get that group of people angry and or scared. That makes sense considering that these particular efforts to ban young people understanding the world they live in started during the end of former President Trump's re-election bid. And you can go look it up if you want. I haven't published that. Go back to the polls, early October, first time he started making announcements about it. It is easily accessible if you feel like doing the work. But on the longer term, it endangers the ability for the creation of better outcomes and better public policy. We have to embrace a simple truth. Laws and policy don't come down from heaven. They are sets of choices made by people. Every teacher who has ever walked into any classroom lives by a simple belief. When people know better, they do better. If those teachers lose the ability to honestly help students as citizens better understand this present moment, we also risk losing the ability for them to make better choices in the future that improve everyone's policies, everyone's lives, that make everybody matter. So we have to make sure this does not pass. So what do? First off, if you haven't gotten registered to vote, get registered to vote.
Yes.
Growing up in my house, there was 2 sins. You better not miss voting, and you better go to work. Anything that keeps you from voting and keeps you from going to work is wrong. Find out who your representatives are. Call them, email them, leave messages, make them know who you are. And if you, I feel like I need to do something more, then I don't know if Pastor Shaq is here, who is a true jewel of our community. You go follow Pastor Shaq's lead and get involved in the community. Get involved in local and regional elections. You become the person who is the voice that needs to happen. All right? There are things that need to be paid attention to. And I hope in this little bit today, you all got a few more questions that you need to go get answers to. And when you go get answers to that question, we will move this, our progress, and the thing that today is about, which is seeking the freedom we all should enjoy as citizens under the laws of this country are supposed to have. Thank you for your time today. God bless you. And look at Hamilton. All right.